Gill Watson by Ross Moule, Forster 2428. Narrated by David Tredinnick. I never was at school for more than 2 or 3 days at a stretch. My mother did her best to make sure I did my correspondence lessons, but my education ran second to the family making a living. Dad was a travelling horsebreaker, and Mum picked up some work in pubs or wherever she could if we were in the one place long enough. Our home was a Bedford truck and an old caravan. We weren't poor, and Dad wasn't tight-fisted, but there had to be value and advantage if he was to let money escape from his grasp. Dad put most of what we earned under the mattress, building the deposit for a place of their own. It was his dream, their obsession. He carried an unquestioned reputation for turning out well broken-in horses, and I earned my keep by quietening the worst of them before Dad started the hard work. I also rode the sideshow, as Dad called it, when the owners turned up to pay up. He would shout, "Susan, get circus boy, the show is on." We were in Roma, Queensland, working our way towards Mount Isa. This was our regular 2-year run that finished up at the Isa Rodeo. At Longreach, we were overrun with horses, 20 in the first draft and another dozen promised. For the first time in a long time, Dad had no option but to find help. He tried a dozen hands, but wouldn't have a bar of any of them. A day or two after we started handling the first mob, this tall, narrow Aboriginal bloke, covered in dust, with a saddle on one shoulder and a swag on the other, fronted up and, all of a sudden, Dad had his man. Mum said all she knew was that his name was Gill Watson, and your father said he'll do. "So, James," she said, "he'll do." He and Gill were from day one like an old married couple, anticipating each other's moves, handing each other gear before it was asked for, working in a very precise routine that hadn't been planned. He camped under the truck, was in bed with the sundown, ate alone, and said very little. We were 6 weeks into the job when the first mob was finished and delivered, money under the mattress. Dad estimated that it would take another 4 weeks to find the last horse. He was well into planning the next camp. He was like that. Nothing left to chance. Then the world rolled over on top of all of us. He was turning out the last horse of the day. Mum, as she did, yelled from the caravan door that tea was on the table. Gill turned up, but Dad didn't. After 10 minutes, Gill went looking and found him in the drafting yard, sprawled out on the ground, dead. The ambulance officer said his heart most likely gave out, and so did the hospital. Whatever it was, he was gone. Gill stayed on, and I had to step up, and Mum held it all together. We turned out the last horse a month after we lost Dad. Mum was unsettled, anxious, and needed a plan, a direction to follow. There was enough money for her to buy a small house in town. That was the first item on her plan. The second was gifting Gill the plant, truck and caravan, all the gear, and 100 quid. "Gill," she said with tears in her eyes, "take James with you and teach him the trade and bring him back to me in 2 years." Gill nodded, then got up and left the caravan. I can still remember that grim day I left Mum. It was the last time I was ever to see her. I knew nothing else but living on the road, and when Gill and I started our run, I thought it would be a continuation of what I'd been doing all my life. I didn't realise that travelling with an Aboriginal bloke was another life altogether. White fella talk on the road was that I was kidnapped, probably stolen, a half-caste or creamy, sometimes brindle, and so much more, but mostly a white kid in the company of an Aboriginal. To most white country people, including the police, that was unacceptable. Hiding in plain sight and avoiding confrontation were life skills I learned very quickly. We had no complaints concerning our work, but getting the dough could be a problem at times. On more than one occasion, a station would claim they had given rations and clothes to the local Aboriginal settlement or mission to the value of the breaking invoice, and, as such, Murray's, who share everything, said they had already done that for us, so all was square. We learned quickly to be careless and at times misplacing finished horses in local Aboriginal bush camps until we did get paid. We spent endless hours around campfires pulling our problems and the world's apart, then slowly getting them back together a little better than they were. I learnt in 2 years everything I needed to negotiate for the rest of my life. We had been out for more than 2 years, and, as was Mum's wishes, we returned to Longreach. We took care of Mum's estate, then headed east without any ideas for the now or when. In September 1954, I had stepped aside and left the running of the abattoirs and tannery to my son, Gill, and my daughter, Susan. My wife, Belle, passed away roughly at the same time as her brother, Gill, my teacher, dearest friend, and partner. I'm about to venture out on my annual pilgrimage to Longreach, once again closing the circle, and not for the last time, I hope. July 2023. The end.